Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, today is the day!
Sing it! It's gonna be freaking awesome! Come on! It's gonna be freaking awesome! You know the words! It's gonna be freaking awesome! That's it! Sing! It's gonna be freaking awesome! Yeah!
Yo, it's Jesse Blaze Snider, the Coolest Geek Alive, and today is the day I've been waiting for like 12 years. My book, King of Kings #1, is on Kickstarter. This is amazing. It's been such a long journey for me to make my own book. You know, I've been working for every major company under the sun. I've jumped around, even the ones that you can't find my name credited to having worked for them, like let's say in Archie Comics. Oh yeah, I did. I almost worked for them for a little bit. You can't find any evidence of it other than if you go on my computer, you can find pitches and you can find scripts and you can find things that I wrote, but you wouldn't know. So any working writer is constantly pitching and getting their stuff out there for every company imaginable, because really, in order to make money as a writer, you have to be consistently working on at least 3 to 4 books a month in order to have a steady enough income to pay your bills. And honestly, just to hustle to get a job at a time is really tough. It's when all of a sudden you become in demand that you can be getting multiple gigs at once. But to hustle to get multiple gigs at once at any given time means you're just constantly hustling. And invariably, things just kind of go one gig to another. So today, I'm going to talk specifically about comic books and about my journey into the industry. I have studied comic books for my whole life because my father was a really big fan. And he's the one who gave me my first comic book in January of 92. Actually, I wrote out my comic book milestones a while back and I still had it. He gave me a copy of The Thing, number 34. It's the first comic book I ever laid eyes on. And I was 9 years old. And I thought it was pretty cool. I liked The Thing. He was a funny character. Flash forward just a little bit later in February, I got a subscription to Spider-Man. This was around the time, right after Erik Larsen had finished. It was Mark Bogley, and I want to say his name was David Michelin or somebody, but this was when they introduced Carnage. Some really cool issues at the time, but I had an over-focusing problem. So when I would read for too long, it would hurt my eyes. And it was hard to get me to read an entire comic. I would read word balloons here or there. That was about it. And the same thing was true for these Amazing Spider-Man comics. But eventually, in December 92, at the end of the year, I picked up an issue of Savage Dragon #3, which was a little mini-series. Savage Dragon came out with a 1, 2, 3 mini-series, and then the ongoing series that people know today that's up to, I don't know, are we close to 300 yet? I don't know, we're getting up there. Savage Dragon is one of my favorite series of all time. It is responsible for so much of my love of the comic book medium by virtue of the fact that Erik Larsen loves the comic book medium, and I loved the Savage Dragon. I read that book cover to cover for ages, and it all started with a character, Bedrock, or Badrock, who was guest appearing in this 3rd issue of this miniseries, who was sort of like a juvenile version of The Thing, my first comic book that my dad got me, a funny character, a character whose word balloons I used to read. Well, issue #3 of this Savage Dragon miniseries, Savage Dragon fights Badrock, I don't know what he was being called at that time. His name had changed for legal reasons. And they just sort of banter and fight the entire issue. So the whole issue is the type of reading I would do, the banter parts. I would read the banter, and the banter was amazing because my favorite character, Bedrock, was being juvenile and stupid, and the Savage Dragon was being just sort of mature and commentating on the stupidity of so much of the behavior and the drives of these things. He was very grounded in a wonderful way and funny. He was just pointing out the cracks and the seams of what I had been looking at innocently for so long and laughing over. And he showed that my favorite character was an idiot. I hadn't realized that. I hadn't realized quite how stupid the character that I liked was. And this amazing thing happened. I went from loving Bedrock to having Savage Dragon make fun of him to the point that he became my new favorite character. And Savage Dragon was the one comic book that I read for years and years. And I guess I also read Wizard magazine. I love art, and I always wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a comic book artist for a little while. Ultimately, I would tell you that I had some back problems that would make it very frustrating for me to get the art to the quality that I liked, and I ended up shifting into writing. So let me tell you about a couple things that got me into comics further from here. One, I started working at 7-Eleven when I was like 15 or 16, and I've been reading Savage Dragon and some Wizard magazines for like 6 years, and I hear that Deadpool's a really funny character, and this is before Deadpool was Deadpool. I'm one of the original people who love that character and has popularized that character, starting with issue number 20 from the newsstand of my 7-Eleven. I picked it up and I would read it in the bathroom. I ended up buying them. It was great. I really enjoyed it, and even more than that, starting to buy issues of Deadpool. Within the pages of Deadpool were promotions for other comic books that were going to be released by Marvel Comics. So really quickly, I picked up Uncanny X-Men 360 and X-Men 80, one of which was being written by Joe Kelly, who was the same writer of Deadpool. I said, well, if he did this, I like that writing. Maybe I like this writing. And I also gave a shot to the Marvel Knights line, which I've talked about before, Daredevil, Punisher, Black Panther, and the Inhumans. 3 out of 4 of these ended up blowing my mind and got me deeper and deeper into comics from there. And I'll just say that a relationship with a good friend of mine, Greg Aberback, shout out to Greg, got me into Batman, him into Savage Dragon. We traded collections, and I kept giving him comic books and he kept giving me comic books, and we geeked out together. It was a nice thing. And then from there, I started reading Action Comics because Joe Kelly was writing Action Comics, the Deadpool guy again. I love that guy. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go read Joe Kelly. And Superman, a new love for me. I love Superman. We've talked about that. So I read Superman for a long time after Joe was off the book and other people were on the book. And I read comics galore. When I realized that I was going to be a comic book writer, I pledged myself to studying the thing, and I started to buy as many classic graphic novels and just learn everything that I possibly could about this medium, and specifically the universes of Marvel Universe and DC Universe, because I really wanted to get in there and I wanted to participate in what I saw as the writing of the classic stories. I want to be a Frank Miller. I want to be an Alan Grant. I want to be one of these guys who puts his mark on this thing that I love so much, a Batman or a Superman or Spider-Man or Wolverine or the Hulk. I wanted to write the classic stories that fans would love. And I knew that if I knew the history and the previous stories that had come better than anybody else, that I would be the best man for that job, and they'd be stupid not to hire me. And I swear, I did that diligently. But there are so many other things that kind of come up along the way when you're trying to write for a publisher. And we're going to talk about all these things today. I don't know if we're going to end up cutting this into 2 episodes. I think we may, because there's a lot of things that I want to talk about here. This is my whole career, and there's been a lot of stuff. But with every project that I've ever done, I've really tried to make a masterpiece. I've swung for the fences every single time. Every single time I went, how do I make this the best version of the thing that anybody could hope to find? And unshakably, there would always be something that would wind up getting in the way that was completely out of my control, and usually just inherent in the system the way it's built right now. And that's what we're going to talk about. Marvel and DC, Disney, PIXAR, through licensing, doing licensed comic books, and all of it is the same system. Comic books are just a microcosm of the film industry and the book industry and the music industry, all these things. And I actually work in a lot of these industries because I also do voiceovers and I host and I write music. And so I understand a lot of this a lot better than I think most people do in terms of how it all relates to each other, and it is all very similar across the board. But comic books is where I know it the best, where I studied the hardest, where I was the most dedicated and diligent, because it was the area filled with the people that I looked up to the most. I don't care about directors and screenwriters as much as I care about some of these brilliant comic book creators. I really just value the ideas that have been put forth, and I feel so much more connected to them as writers, having spent so much time with them. When you're reading a book with someone month in and month out and month in and month out, you have a relationship with somebody. It's like you have a pen pal. They don't know that you're their pen pal, but they are. And the great writers, boy, do you come to appreciate the fact that you've had a pen pal relationship with them. And that's what I've always wanted to give back. That's why I didn't want to work in film. I wanted to work in comics. I wanted to have a pen pal relationship with people. Isn't that nice? I didn't know I was going to get choked up talking about this, but it really means something to me. At times in my life, when I felt the most alone, I was reading comics, and there were people who I felt close to because I was reading their story month in and month out. And those relationships mean more to me than any of the others. My relationship with directors and TV stars and movie stars is not the same as my relationship with the people who have made the comic books that I love. And I count more than just the writers, the artists, the letterers, the colorists. There's a team of people who go into making these things, and seeing their name every month. Chris Eliopoulos, who is a letterer, he's a friend of mine now, but he's somebody that I grew up seeing his name. And it seems so silly that when I met Chris, I wanted to be his friend because I felt like I already was his friend. I had a relationship with him. He didn't know about it. Sorry. It's making me cry to talk about it. I feel like, though, it's maybe a nice cry. Maybe it's something that you can relate to as well. The wonderful gift that it is when you really connect with something and you don't feel so alone. And I think way more than me in this world sometimes feel a little alone in comic books. And my relationship with the creators, the ongoing monthly experience of going to the store every Wednesday and getting these incredible works of art from these teams. It's the most meaningful relationship of my life next to my children. And I don't blame them when the movies aren't good or the TV shows aren't as good as they could be. Like you sometimes do with friends and family. I mean, I don't take it out on the old thing when the new thing sucks. You still love the old thing. The old thing is still just as it was. That's why it's like you can't erase these things from history. I have these books still. Some of them. I've lost some things in fires and a couple other things, but I have a lot of these things, and they don't go away. They'll stand the test of time. Batman: The Long Halloween, I can always go pick it up. It's in print right now. It's so nice. I can return to these books, and I highly recommend you guys do. But more than that, I pray that you guys are able to find your way to that monthly relationship, that weekly relationship. I hope that I can be a creative person who creates his own way right now through Kickstarter and through my own companies and publishing that I am right now, to establish that relationship with you, that ongoing connection. That is so valuable. You don't get that from reading a graphic novel. You get that from going to the comic book store every Wednesday. And it's really worth it. It's really worth it. I don't have a ton of books to recommend at the moment that I think are like the hot ticket. But if you go to a store, they'll tell you, they'll direct you, they'll ask you what you like. Go to a store, try it. Go every month and get a book. My relationship with Savage Dragon was magical, is magical. And I mean, it really segues me perfect into my next thing, because I had a relationship with Wizard magazine. I really liked that magazine. I used to collect the cards. I used to collect action figures. Before I read comics, I bought action figures, DC action figures, Marvel action figures. I liked the characters. I just didn't read a lot, basically. And then one day, I'm reading the magazine, and they start making all these references to Twisted Sister. And as some of you guys know now, and I always feel so weird talking about this, I'm just a regular person. Like everybody else, I like to be treated like a regular person. I believe that we're all one. We're all even. You know, there is no better or worse. So celebrity stuff, like I hate bringing that up because it tends to make people change their attitude about me and give me either unfair power or unfairly try to detract from me because they feel like I've been given unfair power. And forgive me, I didn't ask for any unfair power. But on some levels, there are always unfair power. But there's unfair power for everybody. If you're on the basketball court, unfair power comes from height. and if you're on the football court, the unfair power comes from weight. And on it goes. But being the child of a public figure, in general, it just sort of makes you very self-conscious of your life and of life. I mean, unless you're just completely thoughtless and you don't notice the consistent behaviors that people have. But because of celebrity, sometimes you can get places, and Wizard magazine kept name dropping Twisted Sister. And I told my dad, hey, they're name dropping Twisted Sister. You know, like maybe we could write a letter or something like that. We can get invited to Wizard. I wanted to go to Wizard. So sure enough, we got invited to Wizard. We got a tour around the whole place, and I made a couple relationships while I was there. Flash forward a little bit further, I get free tickets to Wizard World Chicago. I live in New York. I have to take a 16-hour bus ride. I'm just like a 17-year-old kid or whatever, making as much money I could so that I could get a bag, go to Wizard World Chicago on a bus for 16 hours, hang out there for one day, go to a motel for like $60, get back to the convention, and then get back on a Greyhound for 16 hours to come all the way back to New York, just so I could meet Erik Larsen, the creator of the Savage Dragon, who I thought he was from Chicago because Chicago was where the Savage Dragon took place. That's specifically why I went to Chicago, because I thought in order to meet Erik Larsen, I would have to go to him. As it turned out, he just thought nobody had ever used Chicago and he thought Chicago was an interesting place, so he made that the setting for the Savage Dragon, and he was traveling to Chicago as well. But I did meet Erik Larsen and drive him nuts, especially over the next couple of years. That's how I met Robert Kirkman. He and I have been friendly since we've been young, long before he was the Robert Kirkman that everybody knows now, the creator of The Walking Dead. When he was doing Battle Pope, he and I are both huge Savage Dragon fans. And Erik would do these little fan meetup things, so you would get to go sit down with him and have lunch and ask him every question. And I would literally bring him piles of 50 books. I would make him sign. I guess it was like a show of my affection. Here you go. Here's 50 books for you to sign. Here's another 50 books for you. I did that to him multiple times. I have so many things signed by Erik Larsen because I would just go down to conventions and harass him. And he used to do sketches for people for free. And I have tons of cool Erik Larsen sketches that he did for me. Oh, geeking out, just thinking about it. So cool. Anyway, that's really largely why I went there. I don't know if it was that year or the next year where I started thinking about writing comics. I think it was the next year because I went back to the convention again and I got into a couple parties because some of the people that I knew about at Wizard, I did the bus thing again. I think this time I might have went with a friend. But I had done a journey. I have been writing poetry and songs basically the longest since I was little, just singing to myself. And then when I could talk, I started writing songs and poems. I like wordplay and puns, that kind of stuff. I would always write love letters and love songs to my girlfriends I liked. I'm a lover. I like, oh, hey, Emily, take this note from me. So that was kind of the beginning of my writing. And then I really enjoyed things like journals and essays when we had to write in school. So I was on the newspaper and I was part of the literary club and I got things published in the literary magazine. And eventually I moved and I went from having a really amazing art teacher who had graduated from Cooper Union, was super cool hippie chick. And then it switched to this new teacher who wanted me to start from scratch and was very stifling. But at the same time, at this new high school, I got Mrs. Krinsky. Shout out to Mrs. Krinsky. Sorry, I can't shout everybody out. But Mrs. Krinsky had this amazing program called Independent Writing for Publication, which I did for 2 years in a row. And we were submitted to contests all around the country all year long in all sorts of categories: poetry and songs and essays, feature articles, journalism of various types. I got to win awards. I got featured in magazines. I got my one-act play performed. I was a runner-up in Emerson College's annual journalism competition. I had really a great run, and it was super inspiring. So it switched my gears from, okay, I'm going to be an artist to maybe I'm going to be a writer. And the first thing that I did as I got really excited, because I had written this amazing short story called Remember Me, Dragon. I really like it. I'm sorry I'm complimenting myself. It was based on an image that I had seen in a Riffs book that I loved, and I did like a approximation of the drawing and wrote this story about it. And that made me want to be a writer, to actually be a storyteller. And I started working on this novel, and I wrote the introduction and the first chapter, and then I got writer's block. And my dad told me one day that they say that you should write what you read. And I realized I didn't really read a lot of novels, even though I knew how to do it, and I thought I was pretty good at doing it. Actually, I tended to think a lot of the writers were very boring, and I thought I had a knack for sort of writing things in ways that were a little bit easier to digest and not so boring to sit through, because, I was somebody who, my eyes would hurt when I would read, so I really needed a lot to get my attention. But when he said that, I realized that everything that I had really spent my time studying as a medium anyway was comics. I really loved comic books, and I was looking at comic books to be an artist. And now, if I was going to write them, and I think I went at the time, can you make a living doing that, I guess is what I was thinking. It seemed like, are they going to pay me very much to do something so fun? I don't know. A novelist seemed like something I could make money doing. Writing comic books seemed like, I don't know, seems like they're really going to make me work for that. And they did. They really made me work for that. And I'll say, there was this hashtag that went around Twitter just recently called #ComicsBrokeMe. And I saw all sorts of different takes on it. A lot of people were generally feeling like people were, I don't know, crying over spilt milk, that they were successful on whatever level. And it's easy to think that. But comics are frustrating. Creative industry is frustrating because at the end of the day, the creative industry is run by money people. They're run by business people. And the business people tend to have other priorities, for one, and often just don't have great taste, and sometimes can't see the forest for the trees of why something that you understand is a very good idea is a good idea. They can't see it. They can't see it the way a fan sees it. And honestly, that's why I do this show, because these business people need to listen to people like us. They don't understand the disconnect between where they're looking at things from and where art needs to be made from in order for it to succeed. And to be able to talk about all of the frustrations I had over time as a writer trying to work for these companies and give them my best. I mean, really, it's just like, imagine somebody diligently showing up at your door every day going, I am ready to help you produce the greatest things you've ever done. I will work as hard as humanly possible in order to do so. Granted, I'm also a little shy. I know that this seems weird. Hey, you're shy too. I am a little shy. My dad is a rock star, and my whole life I've had people coming up to me because they want something from me, and I hate it. I hate that people want something from me besides whatever it is that I can offer them. They're going around me to get to this guy. They're trying to get past me. And the idea that I wanted work and I had to go through an editor to get it, it killed me. It made me feel so shit. It made me feel like I was one of these people who was trying to use me my whole life to get to my dad. I hated that. It was the worst feeling. And I didn't want to use these people. So I was very slow going. I would befriend people because like I really wanted to be genuine about what I was doing. I was having such a hard time. The idea of just like approaching somebody cold and pitching them a whole bunch of books, I just couldn't do it. Oftentimes it would take me like 3 years. And it's funny, my genuine approach, I could tell you a great story about famous writer James Robinson. He's a nice guy. And James told me one day at a party, and he was sincere. He wasn't trying to be a douche, but he said this to me. He says, "You know what your problem is, mate? You're too sincere. People meet you and they're like, is this bloke really this sincere?" And then he meets you again and you're like, "Hi, he's still doing that sincere thing." And then you meet you a third time and you go, I guess he really is this sincere. That's what he said to me. I didn't know. I still barely know how to take that because all I want to be is sincere. I hate this frickin' superficial bullcrap world. And I just want to see real men of merit and women. I mean, the short women, men. I want to see merit rule the day. I want to see wisdom and intelligence, not smiles and handshakes. We get a lot of throw us a bone social justice things. We're like, oh, look how much better things are getting on this level or that level. It's not that level in which people are suffering. It's this poverty. It's this having to be so stricken and have your nose so hard to the grindstone. And if I want to try to write comic books, I also got to take so many other jobs at the same time. Like, you know, I've always had essentially like 5 jobs going on at any given time. I don't have one career. I have so many careers because every one of my careers that I do are so volatile. They really are. And at different times I've been up, 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 up. But then when I'm down, I'm like on my damn face, dragging against the gravel. It sucks. So it's very frustrating to be a creative person in this business and know the way forward better than anybody and not be able to help. And at the same time be struggling because of my desire to help. I don't know what the answer is to make any of this any easier, but it's certainly not an easy business, but none of them are. So I do feel for all the people who say comics broke them. At certain times, comics has broken me, but you get back up. You get back up and you try some more, as we are today with the King of Kings Kickstarter. So when I decided I was going to write comic books, I started with the Marvel submission guidelines. I wrote 2 stories. One of them was like a little send up to the Spider-Man Tangled Web thing that they had done at the time, which was an ongoing series that featured really interesting, artsy kind of creators doing different things with Spider-Man and his Rogues Gallery. I happen to love that book, of course. And actually, we'll say homework for today. See if you can track down some Spider-Man Tangled Web trade paperbacks. Specifically, there's a story in there about Crusher Hogan. It's a one-shot story. And there's a story in there about one of the Kingpin's employees called Severance Package. Those 2 stories are 2 of the best comic books that I've ever read in my life. They were so awesome. Something that really transformed what a comic book was in my mind and brought some amazing humanity and depth to these superhero stories that you don't always see. See if you can track down that trade paperback for Spider-Man Tangled Web. By the way, if you've ever taken one of my homework assignments for real and gone off and read or watched whatever it is, I want to hear from you. Write to jesseblaze@jessesnider.com. Do you agree? Was it an amazing comic? Was it an amazing film? What did you think? Did it hold up? Do I have the great taste that I believe I have? Let me know. Tell me if I don't. So my story, loosely inspired by these Tangled Web type stories, was called Bottom Dollar. And the other one was this Punisher 2-part. that I wrote, basically because of my love of Batman. I wanted to bring aspects of Batman to the Punisher. There was a lot of things that were like almost religious within the Batman mythology. Things like guns are the weapon of the enemy, hard lines that Batman took, and I wanted to give the Punisher a bunch of hard lines like that. And I created this story called Happy Birthday Son, where you found out that for years the Punisher has been violently celebrating his son and his daughter's birthday, his wife's birthday, his wedding anniversary, Christmas, Easter, Halloween, and the 4th of July. There might have been a couple others or whatever. But it was just this list of times when the Punisher was most active because he was most miserable. And for me, Punisher was this like Prince Charming gone wrong. Like he could have had happily ever after, but every one of his things that he loved were murdered. So now instead he's got angrily ever after. And that was how I wanted to write the book. And I wrote a really great 2-part story. It was, you know what? Honestly, it wasn't great. I wrote an okay 2-part story. My friend Mark Sumerak, who I had met through Wizard World Chicago and those connections, he was a low-rung editor at Marvel Comics, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man, and he helped me with my Marvel submission. And when he was done working on it with me, it was great. It became great. But honestly, there was a whole bunch of things that like I was definitely a little bit embarrassed, like ashamed. Like when it was pointed out to me, I was like, oh yeah, no, that is a much better idea. You're smart. And Mark is a very talented writer in himself. Shout out to Mark Sumerak. Love you, Mark. Wouldn't be here without you, buddy. Well, I would be, but you are one of the important people who I would have had to meet somebody else like Mark if I was going to continue forward. You know, Mark really took the time. He wrote me back multiple page letter, giving me notes on my script to help me forever and for good. And forever, Mark, I will kiss your feet. A friend of Mark's is Chris Sotomayor. He was the one who was responsible for me next getting work, even though there is a divergent path that came up here where I almost got right to the top of the heap at Marvel all of a sudden when I got invited to tour Marvel with my dad, again, because I'm a diligent reader and I noticed him being name dropped, not by name. Actually, there's a old website called The Pulse. They were a sister website to The Beat, run by Heidi McDonald. Jennifer Contino is the person who ran there. I've been friends with Heidi and friends with Jennifer for ages and ages and ages. They're like some of my oldest friends in comics because I used to write as a journalist for The Pulse as the geek. Funnily enough, I was the geek and I wrote reviews of comic books and stuff. And I did a couple interviews. I did an interview with Dan Slott and Erik Larsen and a few people. Anyway, I didn't do it for very long because eventually I decided that I needed to put my energy into writing fiction. I really like writing features and articles. I just like to write. So I didn't mind doing the journalism, but there was a lot of energy that goes into that, and I put everything that I have into those things. So I found myself just kind of getting a little lost in the journalism and making that stuff fun, and I decided to rededicate myself to writing and pitching comic books specifically. So Joe Quesada does an interview with Jennifer Contino on the website, and I see that Joe is talking about me. He's not naming me, and he's not naming my father, which I didn't know that he knew my father, but he's talking about us. I had met Joe on the balcony of the Hyatt Hotel, which was right next to the Chicago Comic-Con, and they used to do this Beatles convention in the lobby, literally the same weekend every year, where they would be literally singing Kumbaya Beatles songs on acoustic guitars all throughout the building. And I'm looking down at all these people, and Joe comes stand next to me, or I come stand next to him. I don't know. It might have been a plan that I had because I was a huge fan of his. I was reading his Daredevil for years, and I was a huge fan of his editorial decisions. I really believe he's a brilliant creative person. Shout out to Joe Quesada if you're out there. I haven't talked to Joe in forever, but you know he's one of my idols. I watched him do many, many brilliant things. You know, he's just a great artist and a man to be admired. And he really is responsible for the enjoyment, I would credit, of my Marvel Comics experience, because he rose in the ranks in editorial as I was reading, and he was overseeing everything that I read very quickly working at Marvel. So anyway, I'm a huge fan of Joe's, and me and Joe had a conversation about how I didn't really get the Beatles. I never really heard any of their music, or not much of their music. I didn't really have a concept of who the Beatles were. Keep in mind, I'm like 16, 17, maybe 18 at the most. And he was kind of explaining some of this stuff to me or whatever else. And it came up in that conversation that my father was Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, music, because I was, my dad very famously, he used to do a radio show called The Metal Nation. And the slogan for that show was, if it ain't metal, it's crap. And to a certain degree, my dad does like the Beatles, but it's like stuff that he has like a nostalgia for as a kid. It's not what he really listens to. So it wasn't like it was playing in my house all the time. And I should have known at the time, but when my father is mentioned, his expression kind of changes, and it's like a ha ha ha. I thought it was just an expression of, oh wow, I'm aware of that band or whatever, but it was a lot more than that. As it turns out, my father claims his bass player Mark Mendoza, who did arguably look a lot like him at the time, both about the same height, big curly afro, and is known for bullying behavior like this. So if Joe didn't exactly know what my father looked like at the time, Mark and him do look pretty similar. And my dad said he didn't remember doing this. My dad has been bullied himself. He hated finding out that he had bullied Joe Quesada. Like absolutely. My dad and I remember meeting guitar player Twiggy Ramirez long before he was famous at a Dunkin' Donuts. And when he got famous, him talking up my father, and I forget when, but my dad had told me, son, you always got to be nice to the people on your way up, because you never know where they're going to end up when you're on your way down. And I think you should be nice to people because we're all one, and you do unto others as you'd like to see done unto you. But if you need a good reason, I do think that is a good reason to be nice to everybody. So my dad was really bummed out when he heard this, and I was actually freaking out. I'm like, holy shit, Dad, I'm trying to be a comic book writer. You're the one who said I should freaking write what I read, and now you freaking threw my future editor-in-chief across a hallway at a recording studio back in the 70s, and now I'm going to get permanently banned from writing anything for Marvel Comics because of you. Or at least that was my fear. I said, you got to fix this, dude. That was the story, that a young Joe Quesada, he had gone to give them some coffee or something like that, I think. And he went to knock on the door. The door bursts open. My father knocks him all the way across the hallway, knocks the coffee all over him. And is this like terrible bit of like emasculation and embarrassment and stuff. And my dad feels bad. Not at the time, but now after the fact, as I've brought it to his attention that he was allegedly a bully in a past life. Which really, truly is something that my father fights against and would never want to be. So he says, get me the email for this lady who did the interview at the Pulse. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So I connect my dad with Jen. He does a follow-up interview going, hey, this is me. My son recognizes that as him. I recognize, and he says he doesn't remember the story, but he says, I recognize these things, this studio, all these things. That sounds like that's probably right on whatever level. And if it is me, if I am responsible for bullying you, Joe, I'm so sorry. Please give me the opportunity to apologize. And this email is passed on, or this interview, this follow-up interview is passed on to Joe Quesada, and we get an answer shortly after. We get invited to Marvel Comics. So I go to Marvel Comics. It was amazing. I met one of my idols over there, Jesse Falcon. Shout out to Jesse Falcon. He is the guy who heads up the action figure line for all the Marvel Legends that they've been making for years, the 6-inch scale toys. He's responsible for all of that stuff, and I think he's been doing a great job for ages and ages. And I got to see a whole bunch of toys that never got made and a ton of things that were about to come out, I don't know, a good couple years before some of them came out. It was pretty amazing. Saw so much behind the scenes of just editorial, met a ton of people, and I got to hand my new 2-issue scripts for The Punisher, helped by Mark Sumerak, to Axel Alonso, who was the new Marvel Knights editor over there. And I was so excited because Axel Alonso had also edited some of my favorite comics of all time over at Vertigo. He edited Preacher and a number of other books. So I was just over the moon. And I actually got a phone call 2 weeks later from Axel. He read my script. He says it's a better first draft than most of the people who work for him. Little did he know, and I didn't mention, that Mark Sumerak had helped me get that script to a better spot. Thank you, Mark. I love you, man. Appreciate you, man. But anyway, he loved it, and I thought I was in like Flynn. But I wasn't. I wasn't in like Flynn, man. I wasn't in like Flynn. Time went on, and Axel got promoted. And promoted again, and promoted again. And actually, along the way here, he ended up stealing one of the great ideas that I had from my Punisher script, which honestly, I'm honored. And I swear, I tell this story way less to connect myself with greatness and way more because I just think it's so interesting the way ideas are propagated and things just kind of will get out there one way or another. So the editors in the business, they tend to do a lot of the writing. And by that I mean the overall idea behind any given miniseries or one-shot was probably basically came up upon by an editor. And they said, hey, can you give me something like this? Give me something like this to somebody that they wanted to hire. So with that in mind, Axel reads my Punisher scripts. He's up on it. He's going to get me in. He's going to work with me. Then he gets promoted. His promotion is to a special projects kind of thing where he's working with J. Michael Strigninski on this book, Supreme Power, and miniseries for Hyperion, who is a Superman derivative, and Nighthawk, who's a Batman derivative. Now, in my Punisher story that I was trying to give a little bit more of that Batman mythology to, I had introduced a character named Mr. Hand. Mr. Hand was a torture technique specialist who worked for the NSA who was crooked. He had been in Nam. He had had one of those have a nice day patches on his backpack, and to torture him, they cut slits in his eyes and they cut a scarred smiley face into his face. Now, at the time that I wrote this was novel and had not been done in any way that I had come across. And you know what? And it probably did exist on some other level, but I hadn't seen it at that time. I wrote it into the Punisher thing going, oh, cool, this is my different variation. Well, guess who remembered? Mr. Axel Alonso, when he was working on his Nighthawk / Batman derivative, he introduces a Joker who's a clown with, you guessed it, scars all over his face. I think he had might have been a frown scars onto his face. So he had flipped the idea a little bit. But then David S. Goyer, who was the writer for The Dark Knight, he's a comic book writer. So I'm sure he's paying attention because he writes some books sometimes, and it was very highly publicized, the image of the clown in Marvel's version of the Joker. It was cool. It was a good idea. That was why I put it in my book. So I really believe, and maybe it just happened to be in the ether and he got the same idea at the same time, that he saw the advertisement that had then been made for the Nighthawk series and went, oh yeah, they're fake Joker. I've got a real Joker I'm making. That's a great idea. Let's do that. Or he just pulled the same idea out of thin air, which is possible, which is totally possible, because I swear to you, I wrote a Batman story, and I'm getting ahead of myself, which this might have to wait until next episode when we get into DC Comics at further length, but I wrote an audition script for DC, and my one-shot audition script had Batman and the Joker, and it was strikingly similar to The Dark Knight. Granted, he probably would have finished his script before I had finished mine. Making a movie takes a lot longer, and making a comic's really short. So I was kind of blown away by so many similarities in my Joker story and in The Dark Knight, and it's really, really just amazing to me how good ideas bubble to the surface. And it actually connects to a scientific principle. They call it the 100th monkey theory, I'm pretty sure, where they had done this experiment where they were teaching these monkeys how to wash fruit before they ate it so that it didn't have sand on it. And once 100 monkeys had learned on one side of the island that if you'd washed the fruit, it was better, that idea got picked up in the collective consciousness, and the monkeys on the other side of the island started doing the same thing, started behaving the same way. So this is really interesting. There's a great book called The Field, which talks about sort of the electromagnetic fields. People talk about our auras, which connect us or whatever, but also the planet Earth has a field, just like in Avatar, the James Cameron movie. A lot of the things that are going on in Avatar, he's basing on the reality. These jungles are an ecosystem where all their electric fields are connected to one another. We are all tied together with this stuff. And of course, the most obvious proof examples of this are birds flying in a V, whales swimming in a pod. Animals all the time are connecting to and being sensitive to their electrical field in order to accomplish great things. Imagine what we could do. So it's said that when a good idea comes into the consciousness, it's just a matter of time before somebody gets it. A lot of people get the same idea at the same time. And it's been proven time and time again in the film business, in book businesses, in music. Anyway, continuing on. So I end up being devastated by Axel Alonso because he doesn't have any time for me. He literally got like 3 promotions over the next 6 months since I spoke to him on the phone. And he basically said, hey, look, I don't have any time to do this. So I started working on some scripts for Spider-Man Unlimited and for X-Men Unlimited, which were books designed to audition new talent. They would have 2 11-page stories inside of them, usually by people you had never heard of before. But this was how Marvel was attempting to get new people into the company at the time. So I was very enthusiastically trying to knock something out of the park for either of those books. I think I only finished the Spider-Man Unlimited one. I wrote a really cool script where Spider-Man gets caught in between the 2 buildings because one of the buildings is falling down and he like webs them, and he's pantsless. His pants get ripped off in the foray, and he's just sort of like hanging from the road with no dignity. It seemed like a really good Spider-Man story. He fights these 3 animal-themed villains and calls them the Zoo Crew. It was very fun. But I think the reason why I didn't do the X-Men one was because I found out that X-Men Unlimited had been canceled while I was working on that script. So that one got abandoned. And then when I finished Spider-Man Unlimited and I went to go submit it, I found out that that book had been canceled as well. So a few months went by, and my friend of friend, Mark Sumerak's friend, Chris Sotomayor, wonderful colorist, and someone who would go on to be a wonderful friend of mine and a wonderful friend to me over the years. Shout out to you, Chris. Chris Soto! He reached out to me to tell me that they were taking submissions for Marvel Comics Presents for 8-page stories, and he gave me the email for the editor who was taking them. So I immediately submitted a version of my Marvel submission story, that bottom dollar thing, which was me trying to win an Oscar. You know, I was trying to win an award for the best short story of all time. But of course, the comic book equivalent of the Oscar is the Eisner. And that's what I was trying to win, an Eisner Award. Based on the Identity Disc miniseries that had happened relatively recently, where the Vulture was shown to have a granddaughter and that he had some amount of heart. So I told this story about this guy who was trying to pay for a beer with his bottom dollar, a dollar bill that was written all these nice, merry messages on it. Congratulations, good luck, etc. And the bartender won't take it. He's like, what happened? And the guy says, my American dream fell apart. My son tried to stop some gang violence. He ended up getting hit in the head with a brick, has been in a coma, and they've lost everything. He's had to send them all back home to his country of origin and had to close the business down, and now he's just waiting to catch a boat back to send himself back home. And after this sob story, this character who came in a trench coat with a big bag, he puts the bag on the seat next to the guy and says, hey, you dropped this, and leaves really quick. And the guy's like, what? I didn't drop this. And he looks inside, and there's all this money. And he goes running outside, and he looks up in the sky, and there's like the shape of an angel off in the distance. And then you like zoom back in the city as you turn the page, and there's a conversation going by. Tell me where the money is, Vulture. Vulture says, I told you, I gave it away. And the last page was Spider-Man punching his tooth out, him hanging upside down from the thing where he says, yeah, right. And they thought it was like a little harsh on Spider-Man, and they didn't think there was any reason for the Vulture to do that. even though the recent Identity Disc miniseries, as I mentioned, had set Vulture up as somebody who might do something like this. But clearly, the editor I was working with hadn't read that miniseries, so it didn't make any sense to him. But I thought, people make mistakes, and it is a cautionary tale in the right way, like it was using Spider-Man for good. I really think he made a mistake. Years later, I actually shared that with one of my great friends, editor Aaron Sparrow, and he told me that he thought it really was what I had intended it to be. It was the type of story that you see wins awards. I was trying to write something really meaningful, but I got rejected. So I went, all right, well, if meaningful is not going to get me there, let's go the other way. And I flipped around an amazing Deadpool story. I was like, Deadpool's my favorite character. I know how he talks. I know what would be great. I know what I'd like to see. I'll fix it. So I wrote this great story where basically Deadpool goes to kill this guy and his cell phone goes off right as he's about to kill the guy, wakes the guy up, wakes up all his bodyguards. He fights all the bodyguards, chops the guy's head off, and then he talks to the phone and he goes, all right, what do you want? Because it's Weasel calling. He's like, what do you want, Weasel? And he said, the guy says he'll double your money if you bring him back alive. And he drops the phone and he turns to the supermodel that the rich old guy was sleeping with and he says to her, he says, did you got any duct tape? And it's funny because I had follow-up stories of doing the Dead Parrot sketch with this guy. If you're a Monty Python fan, I was going to have Deadpool trying to sell him as alive to the other people. Anyway, it was a really great story, and he took it immediately, even though it took him a month before he reached out to me, and it was the most nonchalant reach out of all time. Keep in mind, this is a yes to my first professional work of my career, and it's for Marvel Comics. So I was freaking out, and it was like, yeah, we'll buy the story. What do you mean? Ah! Anyway, it's great. It still holds up. I think you'll really like it if you're a Deadpool fan. It's an authentic Deadpool outing. And Marco Cicchetto, he did the art, and once it's out of my hands, it's more than just mine now. So I have to look at it objectively as the group's, and the group did great. Dave Sharp did the lettering. It's really funny and fun. The only problem with it was that it was supposed to be in an early issue of Marvel Comics Presents, but due to various editorial reasons, it kept getting pushed back. I think originally it was supposed to be as early as issue 3. Deadpool is included on the cover of that volume of Marvel Comics Presents. I used to have a big poster of that cover. I think it was by J. Scott Campbell. And they included Deadpool on the cover because he was supposed to show up in the 3rd issue in my short. But it did not work out that way. Then it was the 4th issue, the 6th issue, the 8th issue, the 9th issue. I'm not even sure which one it ended up coming out in. It somewhere between 10th, 11th, or 12th, one of those. But it literally took 2 years for this thing to come out. So here I am. I've broken into comics with my Punishers, with Axel Alonso. Nope. Here I am. I've broken into comics with my Deadpool story. Nope. 2 years I'm waiting. Meanwhile, while I'm waiting before the Deadpool thing comes out, my editor changes. Andy Schmidt, who had initially hired me, he moves on to other things. He passes me on to John Barber, who's also working in the Hulk office. So I managed to get myself a one-shot offered to me by John because he really likes my Deadpool story and he feels bad that he's making me wait. So they call them inventory stories. They're stories that usually will sit there for a really long time. I pitch a ton of stories, and he basically keeps telling me to scale them all down. I had one great story called Operation Battle Royale, where the Hulk has isolated himself into the middle of the desert, or rather Bruce Banner has, and he's trying to experiment himself to cure himself. And General Thunderbolt Ross finds him there and launches Operation Battle Royale, which is literally just we pluck every great, giant, big character out of obscurity in the Marvel Universe, good and bad. We take them out of prisons. We take them out of the Avengers Tower. We take them from the Thing and the Juggernaut and everybody, and we just drop them in one at a time, like a WWE Battle Royale. I wanted to do that one so badly. It was going to be so damn fun, and it would have had an appropriate name for what they ended up calling this book when this finally came out years later. And I mean, again, years later. this thing that I wrote for them. It's called Hulk Let the Battle Begin. It was actually called Hulk and Bruce Banner in Slave to the Grind. And Slave to the Grind because it was a character piece. It was half about Hulk, half about Bruce Banner. It was mostly about how Bruce Banner gets his shit together after he wakes up in the desert in just his purple pants. It was a wonderful character study. I really love it. I'm very proud of it. And it was drawn by Steve Kurth. He and I have collaborated many times since, and we'll continue to collaborate for forever. But that was the wrong title. And when it came out, it also included a story that I hadn't written that was a really badly written short from another book, I think from the Marvel Comics Presents thing. It was drawn by Ed McGuinness, who is great. So I think they were trying to get more money out of it by having more eyes on it. But the writing of it was really weird. It was a very confusing story, and it was added to my thing. So it was like this beautiful but really confusing story at the end of my story that was titled Hulk Let the Battle Begin, when my story was more of a character study and kind of quirky, funny, not super action-packed all the way through, even though I did pitch them some things like that. My Hulk Operation Battle Royale, that would have been great as Hulk Let the Battle Begin. Hell yeah, that would have been awesome, but I didn't get to do that. I had a ton of great pitches that I pitched on that Hulk thing, and I had to keep scaling it back and scaling it back. There was one with Dracula and Hulk blood, and there was another one with Dr. Doom offering Hulk to cure Bruce Banner, so you don't have to be Bruce Banner ever again, and making this device that makes him angry permanently. It was great. I did a lot of great work on it. But again, these things took years. The first real kill of my career, and I'm going to leave our story for the day here, with this, was the work that I did at Marvel Comics took so long to actually be physically published that other work that I had kind of gotten through nepotism after the fact, because I was working for Marvel Comics, it came out first. My father was producing a comic book with Fangoria, a very short-lived comic publisher. They only put out the first issue of the book. I wrote a 4-issue miniseries, and because the other things took so long to come out, it hit the shelves first, and my first professional work published on the stands ended up being Dee Snider's Strangeland, which for the son of Dee Snider was a huge ego blow, because I was trying to demonstrate how I had merit on my own and I didn't need to be the son of whoever, or I wasn't riding anybody's coattails, and I literally got the work to do the Dee Snider Strangeland miniseries on the back of the fact that I had 2 different scripts that I had written for Marvel Comics. So it just rocked my mind. It shook me to my core that all of this hard work that I had done, putting in this effort to earn my way the right way, ostensibly from the outside looking in, it looked like my first comic book work was going to be this little piece of nepotism working for my dad, and that my next comic book work would be for Marvel. And that wasn't true. The first time I ever got paid to write anything professionally, it was for Marvel Comics. And that meant so much to me, and still means so much to me to this day. So I've got a lot more stories from this and this journey up the ladder of all these pieces, and I'm sure you guys probably have questions about some of the things that I spoke about today. If you do, you can write me at jesseblaze@jessesnider.com. This was another long episode, so I'm going to put off the fan letter I was going to read until next episode, I guess. But join us next time, and we will be talking about working on licensed comic books for the Muppets, Disney PIXAR, and Disney proper, pitching for HBO Sesame Street, the Muppets proper on TV, Puss in Boots, writing a script and getting stiffed by Archie Comics, reinventing Evil Ernie for Dynamite Studios, putting together a project for Ethan Van Sciver before he became the Ethan Van Sciver that the internet loves to hate, working on various Batman-related and Vertigo-related pitches for DC Comics, pitching Fraggles, going after the Disney license myself as a publisher, and beginning to publish things on my own, as I've made King of Kings #1 with my buddy Mark Polton, David Witt, and others. Please support us on Kickstarter. We are live right now. Right now on Kickstarter, there are packages that you can get that are relatively inexpensive. It does go up quickly over time because it's for donations. We're trying to do more comics. We're trying to get this stuff paid for. I laid out lots and lots of money to get this book basically halfway made, and we got stuck. And now we're asking others to help us finish so that we can print this first issue and we can continue to finish the miniseries as planned. We need your help. If you love and appreciate what I do here on the show, please support me in this endeavor to have a monthly relationship with you guys to make comic books that everybody will love. Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening. Thank you even more to the moon and back if you go check out the Kickstarter for King of Kings #1 right now and back us, please. We need you. I can't wait to continue this conversation about how the sausage is made and all the different ways in which comics can break you next time on the Coolest Geek Alive. You've been listening to Coolest Geek Alive with me, your host, Jesse Blaze Snider. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more excellent geek culture content. Thanks for listening.
It's gonna be freaking awesome. Coolest alive. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Stay with your tribe. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Revenge of the Geeks. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Week after weeks. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Laughing with you. It's gonna be freaking awesome. And crying sometimes too. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Spilling it out. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Making you shout. I'm a genius. I got lyrics coming out me bum for days. You like that? It's a kazoo solo. Play that too. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Talking some shit. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Living legit. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Food in our mouth. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Get in our mouth. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Tell all your friends. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Call right on text. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Raising the bar. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Straight to the stars. It's gonna be freaking awesome. It's starting soon. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Passing the moon. It's gonna be freaking awesome. On with the show. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Ready, set, go. It's going to be freaking awesome. Freaking awesome. It's going to be freaking awesome. Just wait. You'll see. You'll all see.